This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 89, Case Update Special, number 4. In this episode, I will provide updates on some of the cases I've covered on previous episodes of the podcast. I plan to release at least a few more of these update specials between now and the end of the year to try to bring us all up to speed on all of the ongoing cases I've been following. The cases discussed in today's episode include those of Eduardo Posso, Arabella Parker, Ky'mani Moore, and Treyanna Summerville. Before I get into the updates, I'd like to give shout-outs to my newest patrons, Caitlin T. from Knox, Indiana, Megan F. from Nicholasville, Kentucky, Cassandra A. from Bowmanville, Ontario, Canada, Teresa A. from Birmingham in the United Kingdom, Amber B. from Toledo, Ohio, and Julie from Gresham, Oregon. Thank you all so much for your support. Last week, I added a new reward for pledges of $5 or more per month, and that's ad-free versions of my regular episodes, starting with last week's episode, number 88. I'll try to work my way through my back catalog to upload ad-free versions of my previous episodes as time allows. Don't forget, pledges of $10 or more per month have access to a small but growing collection of Patreon-exclusive bonus minisodes as well. Last week, I released number 7, in which I talked about 2-month-old Ky'mani Jones, who went missing from his mother's Washington, D.C. apartment in May of 2021 and is presumed dead, based on his mother's bizarre statements to police and the media. To make a pledge, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod, and thank you again. On that note, I have some big updates for you today. Let's get into it. In episode 15, I told you the story of 12-year-old Eduardo Posso, who died on May 24, 2019, in the emergency room at IU Health Bloomington in Indiana. It was quickly uncovered that Eduardo's father, Luis Posso Jr., and stepmother, Diana Medina Flores, had allegedly spent months starving Eduardo, as well as restraining him, abusing him, and torturing him. At the time of his death, the dark-haired, dark-eyed boy weighed between 50 and 55 pounds, which put him in the 0.1 percentile for boys his age. Eduardo's father and stepmother were independent contractors in town to distribute advertisements for the circus. They had pulled Eduardo and his siblings out of Mayaca City Elementary School in Florida in December of 2018 after the Florida Department of Children and Families received multiple reports of abuse taking place in the Posso home. The children were apparently not re-enrolled in school as the family traveled to promote the circus. Both Luis and Diana's families are deeply involved in the circus community. The family, which included Luis, Diana, Eduardo, and children ages 9, 5, and 2, had been staying in the Economy Inn in Bloomington for approximately 4 days at the time of Eduardo's death. The other 3 children appeared perfectly healthy, with no signs of abuse or neglect. In the motel room, under one of the box springs, police found cords, chains, cuffs, padlocks, and a dog shock collar. It appeared that Eduardo's final days were spent restrained in the bathtub, where he was monitored via a surveillance camera mounted to a towel bar. Pathologists found hair fibers inside Eduardo's stomach and said it meant he had begun consuming his own hair. The amount of inhumanity displayed toward Eduardo by his own father and stepmother is almost unfathomable. Both Luis and Diana were quickly arrested and charged with murder, negligence, criminal confinement, and battery to a minor. Since I last updated Eduardo's story in December of 2020, there have been a couple updates. In April of this year, Luis Posso's defense attorney filed an interlocutory appeal, which is an appeal on a particular ruling of a trial court while the case is ongoing. Luis's appeal centered around the court's denial of his motion in January of 2021 to suppress evidence, including his statements to police, which he claims violated his Miranda rights, and his agreement to allow police to search the hotel room. According to court documents, immediately after Eduardo was pronounced dead, after CPR was discontinued at 3:05 a.m., hospital security separated Luis from his deceased son and contacted law enforcement. I'll read directly from the motion document here. Officer Elliot Jordan of the Bloomington Police Department was the first non-hospital law enforcement officer to arrive. Officer Jordan questioned Mr. Posso, who had now been secured in a guarded room for over half an hour. Mr. Posso was still covered in his son's dried vomit, and body camera footage shows that he was extremely distraught. Officer Jordan did not read Mr. Posso his Miranda rights prior to questioning. Rather, Officer Jordan asked Mr. Posso, "What happened, bub?" In response, Mr. Posso told the officer about the events that led to Mr. Posso bringing Eduardo to the hospital that evening. At the end of this questioning, Officer Jordan told Mr. Posso, "Okay, Luis, hang tight. Obviously, we gotta talk to you a little more." Luis's story, according to the state's response brief filed in October, was that he went to bed and woke up to hear Eduardo gagging. When he went to his son and picked him up, Eduardo vomited. When asked if Eduardo had experienced any health issues as of late, Luis said his wife told him Eduardo had a headache 5 days prior and had fallen in the shower that morning. The interaction between Officer Jordan and Luis lasted under 3 minutes. After this, court documents state, Luis was Mirandized by Deputy Cole Chitwood, after which he was interrogated by Monroe County Sheriff's Office lead detective Andrew Rushing, while multiple other law enforcement officers were in the room and others were outside the room. During that interrogation, the motion document alleges, Luis was not read a Pirtle warning or informed of his right to an attorney, and he signed the consent to search document prior to being informed that the consent form covered both the motel room and his vehicle. The state's brief argues that when Detective Rushing began interviewing Luis at the hospital, he explicitly said, "You know you don't have to talk to me without an attorney, right?" To which Luis responded, "Yes, sir." The appellate's motion also states that once the interrogation moved to the police station, Detective Rushing asked Luis's permission to search his phone and had Luis unlock the phone over a minute prior to Luis signing a second consent form. As a result of this appeal, Luis's trial, which had been scheduled for September of this year, was canceled. From Indiana's My Case portal, it appears that on October 18th, Luis's attorneys submitted his reply to the state's brief, and the same day, because an oral argument was not requested, the case was transmitted to the Court of Appeals for its decision. I'll keep an eye on that and provide another update once the decision has been made. In the meantime, Luis Posso Jr., now age 36, remains in the custody of the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. If convicted, he faces life in prison. Eduardo's stepmother was most recently scheduled for trial to begin on June 3, 2021, but at a change of plea hearing on May 27th, Treyanna pleaded guilty to a single count of felony murder as part of a plea agreement offered by the state, which then dismissed her additional charges. On Thursday, July 15th, Judge Christine Talley Hazeman sentenced 27-year-old Treyanna Summerville Medina Flores to 65 years in prison. With consideration for good behavior, Treyanna may serve as few as 45 years, which means she would remain in prison until at least the age of 72. If she serves her full sentence, she will be behind bars into her 90s. This is just the beginning of justice for Eduardo, who just wanted to juggle and be free. Next, I have a ton of updates in the story of 3-year-old Arabella Parker, the little Pennsylvania girl with the bright red hair and the even brighter smile. Arabella was fatally injured on October 10, 2019 at the Trevorton home of her mother, Samantha Delcamp, and Samantha's boyfriend, Jared Burgess. Arabella was rushed to the hospital, where it was determined her brain was so badly damaged that part of it had to be removed. Arabella survived on life support for 44 days, finally succumbing to her injuries on November 22, 2019. 3 people were charged in relation to Arabella's abuse and death. Jared, who was accused of the savage beating of the little girl, was charged with criminal homicide, 3 counts of aggravated assault, child endangerment, obstruction, 2 counts of simple assault, strangulation, reckless endangerment, false reporting, and 2 counts of harassment. He has been held in the Northumberland County Jail since his arrest within hours of Arabella's hospitalization. Samantha Jo Delcamp, who appeared on The Steve Wilkos Show and made statements that ultimately led to her arrest, faces charges of criminal homicide, 3 counts of aggravated assault, child endangerment, obstruction, hindering prosecution by providing false information to law enforcement, simple assault, reckless endangerment, and false reporting. The third person arrested in connection with Arabella's death was Jared's mother, Christy Willis, who I'll get to in a moment. First, an update on Jared's charges. In February of 2021, Northumberland County President Judge Charles H. Saylor oversaw a court hearing to entertain a defense motion to dismiss charges against 20-year-old Jared Burgess on the grounds that testimony at Jared's preliminary hearing was insufficient to support the charges. At the motion hearing, 25-year-old Samantha appeared by video conference to provide testimony against Jared, who attended the hearing in person. Although news outlets had previously reported that Samantha was in negotiations with the prosecution, Northumberland County District Attorney Tony Matulowicz asked Samantha during questioning if she was testifying because she had been promised anything in return by his office or by police. Samantha replied, "No, I am doing this because my daughter deserves justice." During her testimony, Samantha recounted several items she previously brought up in police interviews, saying Jared beat her 4 separate times from July through October of 2019. She told the judge her then-boyfriend would get angry and punch her, kick her, and slap her in the face. She said Jared made her sit on the bed while he determined her punishment for failing to follow the rules he had set. Samantha told the court, "He would pour soda over my head and spit in my face. He dumped soda over Arabella's head and spit on her as well." Samantha admitted she lied to police during an interview while Arabella lay in the hospital on life support, saying, "I was scared of him. He told me if Arabella were to die, to not worry about it, because we would have another baby." Samantha testified that on the evening Arabella was fatally injured, Jared picked up the little girl and threw her 3 to 4 feet toward a couch, but instead Arabella landed on the floor, after which she began having a seizure. Jared, Samantha said, would not let her call 911, and the call was made almost an hour later when Jared's mother, Christy Willis, arrived. At that time, Samantha said, it was agreed that Christy would say she was present but in another room when Arabella's seizure began, when in truth she was at her own home several miles away. Christy, who was, at the time of this hearing, being held in lieu of $200,000 bail, also faced charges of obstruction, hindering prosecution, and false reporting. Also at the February 9th hearing, Trooper Brian Siebert testified, reading from one of Arabella's doctor's reports, which mentioned 44 injuries the child had suffered and stated that some of her injuries were up to 8 weeks old. The untreated injuries, the doctor said, would have caused Arabella severe pain. Prosecutor Matulowicz assured the court that his case wasn't centered around Samantha. In his recorded police interview, the video of which was played for Judge Saylor at the hearing, Jared admitted to police that he hit and threw Arabella. Mr. Matulowicz said he was ready to proceed to trial, but Jared's public defender, Richard Fewdale, said the defense would file other motions before a jury could be selected. At the conclusion of the hearing, Judge Saylor struck down the motion to dismiss, ruling that Jared's case would indeed proceed to trial. On Monday, April 12th of this year, jury selection began for the trial of Jared's mother, 51-year-old Christy Lynn Willis, who was accused of lying to police about the timing of the incident that caused Arabella's death. During 2 police interviews, according to Trooper Siebert, Christy falsely told investigators that she was sitting at the kitchen table in Jared and Samantha's rental home in Trevorton, Pennsylvania on October 10, 2019, when Arabella, who was eating a sandwich, fell to the ground in the throes of a seizure, gasping for air. Later in the interview, Christy admitted she was not in the home when Arabella's seizure began. Christy, who made the 911 call, sounded cool, calm, and collected, according to court documents. If she had acted with more urgency, said Prosecutor Matulowicz, there was a chance Arabella could have recovered from her injuries. Christy was arrested on October 30, 2019, and has been incarcerated ever since. After a jury was selected on Monday, April 12th, including 7 women and 5 men, Christy's trial began on Wednesday, April 14th, before Judge Hugh Jones. Dr. Paul Bellino testified, saying that when Arabella was brought by ambulance to Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, medical staff was not notified about her injuries and were instead told she had suffered a seizure. If they had been aware of Arabella's abuse, Dr. Bellino said, she would have had a greater chance of survival. Dr. Bellino testified, had we known what happened, we would have been able to provide all of the care we could offer her immediately. The brutal beatings Arabella endured caused over 40 injuries, which Dr. Bellino described in detail on the stand. Another witness for the prosecution was Samantha herself, who testified that she was aware of Arabella's abuse for at least 3 months but did not report it, avoiding children and youth caseworkers by borrowing Christie's vehicle. She testified that Christie knew the reason Samantha was borrowing her vehicle and that Jared arranged for Samantha and Arabella not to be home whenever a caseworker was scheduled to visit their home. The reason she did not report the abuse, Samantha told the court, was because she was scared of Jared. Regarding the evening of Arabella's fatal injuries, Samantha told the court that she was filling the dishwasher when Jared left the kitchen to see if Arabella was eating, as she sat at a little table in another room. When he found she wasn't, Samantha testified, he picked up the little girl and pinned her to the wall. Samantha said she attempted to intervene, at which point Jared pushed her away and threw Arabella 3 to 4 feet toward the couch, but only the bottom half of her body landed on the couch. Arabella's head, Samantha said, hit the floor. Arabella then stood up and promptly collapsed in a seizure. Samantha did not have a phone, and Jared, she told the court, refused to call 911, eventually calling his mother instead, who was a home health aide. Christie arrived shortly thereafter, but waited about 30 minutes to call 911. Samantha testified that outside the hospital on October 11th, she overheard Christie telling her son not to worry because she would lie to police about being in the home and witnessing Arabella having a seizure. A CYS caseworker testified that was the story she was told, and Trooper Siebert repeated his previous testimony about Christie's conflicting stories. Christie's defense attorney, William Cannon, argued that Christie didn't lie and didn't change her story other than a few words here and there. At the time of her interview on October 11, 2019, he insisted, his client had been awake for many hours with no sleep. Prosecutor Matulowicz countered this by saying Christie had arrived at the Stonington police barracks of her own volition for her first interview. The defense presented no witnesses, and after closing arguments on the morning of April 15th, it took the jury less than an hour to return with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Christie's bail was revoked, and she was returned to the Northumberland County Jail to await sentencing. As Christie was led from the courthouse the same day, she covered her face, telling reporters, "I am innocent. You are only getting one side. You all aren't hearing the full story." Christie's attorney, William Cannon, said, "She doesn't believe the jury heard all the facts. We will not discuss what we will do as far as an appeal." District Attorney Matulowicz said he was pleased with the verdict, saying, "We want to thank the jury for their service. I also want to commend Trooper Brian Siebert for an outstanding job in investigating this case." In July, Christie was handed a maximum sentence of 20 months to 17 years in state prison for her role in Arabella's death. Shortly afterward, she filed a motion for a new trial, saying she should have been granted a change of venue due to the large amount of news coverage by the Sunbury Daily Item affecting public opinion of her. In August, Northumberland County Judge Hugh Jones denied Christie's appeal, saying no jurors were prejudiced at the time of jury selection. In October, Christie appealed her conviction to the Superior Court, which has yet to issue a ruling on the matter. Now on to other updates in Arabella's case. In April, the Daily Item reported that Arabella's father, 45-year-old Carl Parker, was arrested and charged with misdemeanor flight to avoid apprehension, accidents involving damage to a vehicle or property, driving under the influence, careless driving, and driving with his license suspended. As reported by Francis Scarcella, who has followed Arabella's case for the newspaper since the beginning, at 2:48 a.m. on Sunday, April 21, 2021, Carl struck the vehicle of a woman delivering newspapers in Milton, pushing the woman's vehicle 20 feet into someone's yard and rolling his own vehicle onto its side. According to the woman, Carl crawled out of his vehicle and ran off toward the bridge heading into Northumberland. When he was arrested the same morning, he refused to speak to police, saying he was invoking his Fifth Amendment. Carl, who had recently been released from prison for his last DUI conviction, was booked into Northumberland County Jail with his bail set at $50,000. In early October, he pleaded guilty, and his sentencing is scheduled for December 17th before Judge Jones, who oversaw Christie's trial. Also in April, Samantha Delcamp and her public defender, Michael O'Donnell, filed a motion for bail modification, which was opposed by DA Matulowicz, although he did say Samantha had been cooperating with the prosecution in the murder case against Jared and had agreed to testify against him even without a plea agreement being reached. Samantha's request for bail was denied at a 3-minute motion hearing in May when Judge Saylor said that by law he could not grant her request because anyone charged with a capital crime or who faced the possibility of life without parole if convicted could not be granted bail. Mr. Matulowicz only stated that he agreed with the court that bail was not an option. Samantha appeared at the motion hearing by video but did not speak. In July, Jared Burgess spoke by telephone with Francis Scarcella of the Daily Item in an interview he himself requested by mail. In the article, Jared was reported as saying he wished Arabella herself could tell the story of what happened on the evening of October 10, 2019. Yeah, buddy, that makes all of us. He also said he wanted to go to trial immediately and that he was willing to accept responsibility for not telling investigators and medical staff what really happened that night. He said both he and Samantha know the truth of what happened. Jared was quoted as saying, "Why didn't she tell them what happened when she was there? I will take accountability for my part, but why won't she? It was a scary situation at the hospital, and I was 19 years old. I'll take accountability for what I have done. Why won't she? Why is she pointing at me? She's playing the innocent one, but we will see at trial. She knows what she did, and I know what I did. We are ready to cross-examine her, and we have eyewitnesses to the abuse. There is no proof I beat that kid. Is a kid getting thrown into a couch getting beat to death?" He also said, "I am 100% ready to go to trial. Not 99%, but 100%. I want to go to trial on this right now." Of the district attorney's unwillingness to comment for the interview, Jared said, "He doesn't want a challenge." As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Paul Bellino testified at Christie's trial, saying if doctors had been told the truth about Arabella's abuse, her possibility of survival would have been greater. Jared said in his interview, "I can't believe him. I have 3 different statements from another doctor and a coroner." As for his mother, Jared claims Christie was falsely convicted. Whether or not he will testify in his own defense was still up in the air, Jared said. "It's being discussed. I just encourage people to come to this trial and hear the truth about what happened." Jared had the nerve to comment on Arabella, saying, "I miss her. I sleep with a picture of her and me together every night." Ugh. Jared's 4-day trial was scheduled to begin with jury selection on October 18th, but the week before, a key witness was diagnosed with COVID-19, so the trial was delayed yet again. Jury selection is now scheduled for November 15th, with opening arguments scheduled for the next day. By the time this episode is released, the trial should have already started, so I may provide more information in the next Case Update special episode. In preparation for Jared's trial, Samantha was moved from Center County Prison, about an hour and a half away from the Northumberland County Courthouse, to Snyder County Prison, which is only about 20 minutes away. I expect her testimony will be instrumental. In episode 18, I told you about 19-month-old Ky'mani Moore, a gorgeous little boy with a head of wild curly brown hair and big brown eyes, who had his entire family wrapped around his chubby little finger. Ky'mani was born on Mother's Day in 2017 to 19-year-old Alyssa Carpenter and 18-year-old Darvin Moore Jr., who broke up in July of 2017, after which Alyssa began dating her former boyfriend, 20-year-old Jason Forsyth. A little more than a year later, Alyssa moved Jason into her mobile home on Meisner Road in Old Lycoming Township, Pennsylvania, and almost immediately, members of Ky'mani's family sensed something was very wrong. Ky'mani began turning up with bruises and marks that Alyssa explained away. He started crying hysterically whenever his mother arrived to pick him up from the home of his paternal grandparents, Melissa and Darvin Moore, who watched helplessly as Alyssa buckled her son, kicking and screaming, into his car seat. In November of 2018, Ky'mani was hospitalized after 3 days of vomiting, lethargy, and fever. Tests showed the little guy had air in his bowels and fluids were leaking into his body. His stomach appeared bruised, but a doctor told Grandma Melissa it was most likely discoloration from his abdominal swelling. When Ky'mani was able to eat and drink without throwing up, he was released from the hospital after only a few days. A month later, on December 21, 2018, Ky'mani was dead. His autopsy found contusions of the head, torso, and extremities, a skull fracture, healing fractures of 2 of his ribs and 1 finger, as well as internal injuries, extensive hemorrhaging, and numerous bruises and marks from prior abuse. Ky'mani's death was ruled a homicide caused by multiple acute and chronic blunt force injuries. Jason was immediately suspected, especially when hospital staff reported that when he learned of Ky'mani's death, he appeared detached and did not appear to want to have anything to do with the situation. However, no arrests were made at the time. Children and Youth Services launched its own investigation into the incident that caused Ky'mani's death, and in June of 2019, the agency indicated both Jason Forsyth and Alyssa Carpenter for child abuse. The same month, Alyssa gave birth to a daughter fathered by Jason. The baby was removed from the couple's custody. Around September of that year, Alyssa and Jason broke up. The following month, Alyssa reported to police that Jason had used her credit card for a few dollars on Twitch. For that, Jason was arrested and hit with 3 felony charges relating to device fraud and theft. Finally, in January of 2020, while still incarcerated in Lycoming County Prison, Jason was charged in Ky'mani's death. He was charged with third-degree murder, endangering the welfare of children, recklessly endangering another person, and involuntary manslaughter. Alyssa was never charged. She and Ky'mani's father, Darvin, temporarily rekindled their relationship, and Alyssa became pregnant for the 3rd time. In March of 2020, both Alyssa and Darvin were arrested after a search warrant led to the seizure of drugs and paraphernalia from Alyssa's mobile home. Both were ultimately released on bail, but in May of 2020, Darvin was arrested again after allegedly throwing an M80 into a backyard in Williamsport, where several children were playing on a trampoline. One child received damage to the retina of one eye and temporarily lost sight in that eye. Darvin was charged in that incident on a number of felony charges, including aggravated assault. Alyssa apparently regained custody of her daughter, and in July of 2020, she gave birth to her 2nd son with Darvin, who they named Ky'mani Moore. Sadly, the baby was born with a congenital heart defect, and although he fought hard, Miano passed away on November 4, 2020, without ever meeting his daddy, who is still incarcerated in Lycoming County Prison, awaiting adjudication of his charges. That's the same facility where Jason Forsyth is currently being held with no bail. However, this is the point where I guarantee you'll see red. On November 1, 2021, Jason Forsyth appeared in court to plead no contest to a single charge, 2nd-degree felony involuntary manslaughter. By entering a plea of no contest, Jason forfeited his right to a jury trial and admitted to acting in a reckless and grossly negligent manner with disregard for the substantial risk of severe injury or death to the helpless 19-month-old baby in his care. With that plea, the rest of Jason's charges were dismissed. When he is sentenced, which is scheduled to take place on January 4, 2022, before President Judge Nancy L. Butts, Jason will receive between 5 and 10 years in a state prison, probably reduced by time served, as well as a $25,000 fine and restitution to the family. I can't tell you how angry and disgusted I am about this utter injustice. When I first found out about the plea agreement, I broke down in tears. The more I've thought about it since, the more pissed off I've gotten. Why Lycoming County District Attorney Ryan Gardner felt it was appropriate to offer a child murderer a sweetheart deal like this is beyond my comprehension. Then again, this is the same district attorney who refused to allow a mere investigation into the death of 16-week-old Remy Cohen, whose story I told in episode 23. Despite the strong opinion of the medical examiner who conducted Remy's autopsy that the baby's death should be reviewed by the Pennsylvania Child Fatality Review Board, Mr. Gardner apparently doesn't feel that's necessary. In fact, Mr. Gardner flat out ignored a petition on which Remy's mom Ashley and I gathered over 1,600 signatures requesting that investigation be done. We sent the petition in October of 2020. Neither of us ever received a response. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know I tend to fangirl over prosecutors who do an excellent job getting justice for the kids I talk about, and I'm not usually one to talk negatively about prosecutors in general, unless they do a terrible job. Clearly, Mr. Gardner doesn't value the lives of Lycoming County's children, and the plea deal he gave to Ky'mani's murderer is absolute, indisputable proof of that. My heart goes out to Ky'mani's family, whose suffering over losing their sweet boy has only been compounded by this latest injustice. My anger and disgust are absolutely nothing compared to the heartbreak they continue to endure, and I'm just so sorry this is what passes for justice in Lycoming County, Pennsylvania. Last summer, I covered the story of 18-year-old Treyanna Summerville of Gouverneur, New York, on both the blog and the podcast. Treyanna died on June 22, 2020, in the home she shared with her mother, 13-year-old sister, and stepfather, who was deployed in South Korea at the time. Treyanna's 13-year-old sister, who I'll call RC, was initially arrested and charged with her murder, leading to a great deal of upset in the community and beyond. In the 7.5 years prior to Treyanna's death, Gouverneur police had responded 16 times to the Charlton home for complaints of child abuse or neglect, welfare checks, domestic abuse complaints, a juvenile runaway, disorderly conduct, and criminal mischief. Multiple classmates and other witnesses reported that Treyanna often showed up to school and other places with various injuries, including missing teeth and a shaved head, and was known to wear long sleeves, pants, and hats even in the summer. Students told school staff about Treyanna's injuries and even went to the police with their concerns, but they felt their worries were simply brushed off. Literally no one who knew the family felt RC could be responsible for Treyanna's death, especially with the history of the girl's mother, LaShawna Charlton. Treyanna's older stepbrother, Isaiah Samuels, reported that he and Treyanna were frequently abused by LaShawna, even being beaten with a bat in an incident that earned LaShawna felony charges of assault and child endangerment. He told a reporter, "That's when she started using the blunt objects more. They took the bat away, she found something else. She would strangle us. She would beat Treyanna's fingers with a belt buckle. She put knife marks on me. She was just mad abusive for no reason. She would get ticked off about the littlest stuff." A month after Treyanna died, LaShawna was arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter, accused of contributing substantially to Treyanna's malnourishment and death, although LaShawna was quickly released on bail. RC's case remained in youth court until, in September of 2021, the murder charge against Treyanna's younger sister was finally dropped. St. Lawrence County District Attorney Gary Pasqua told the court RC's charge should be dismissed because the evidence no longer supports the charge nor the interests of justice. Mr. Pasqua told reporters, "With regards to this case, at this point, the charge has been dismissed and it's been sealed." With regard to LaShawna's case, when asked why there had been no indictment or any other apparent movement in the previous 14 months, he said, "I disagree with the idea that nothing has happened. The fact that the public or anyone else is not in the loop in terms of what we're doing doesn't mean things aren't happening. It's been a long investigation. At the end of the day, it's about doing what's right based on the evidence." I think you made an excellent point there, and this next update proves that. Just because we don't see movement in a case doesn't mean big things aren't brewing. On September 30th, 2021, a grand jury finally returned an indictment against LaShawna Charlton on the following charges: second-degree murder, first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and endangering the welfare of a child. The grand jury came to the conclusion that between June 16th and June 22nd, 2020, LaShawna subjected her daughter to prolonged physical abuse that included hitting Treyanna with a hammer, which caused a severe knee injury that in turn led to infection and sepsis. The grand jury also concluded that LaShawna failed to obtain medical assistance for Treyanna, despite being aware of her daughter's injuries and condition, that she withheld nutrition, causing Treyanna's severe malnourishment, and finally, that she gave the teenager large amounts of diphenhydramine, more commonly known as Benadryl, causing an overdose. According to the FDA, high doses of the drug can lead to serious heart problems, seizures, coma, or even death. This was the first we'd heard anything about Treyanna suffering a septic infection, the hammer blow, the knee injury, or an overdose of any medication. LaShawna's child endangerment charge is connected to her alleged treatment of her younger daughter during the same 6-day period. While I'm relieved that the 14-year-old's charge was dropped and LaShawna finally received adequate charges, I'm just sick to my stomach over the new revelations about what Treyanna went through during her final days. I can't imagine how horrific her last moments of consciousness must have been, knowing how badly she was hurt and how sick she was, and that her mother would rather let her die than possibly get herself in trouble. I also can't imagine what her sister went through, watching her sister die, then being blamed for it, and put in jail for months upon months. It's just unthinkable and sickening. 39-year-old LaShawna Charlton was arraigned on her new charges on October 20th before Judge Tatiana Coffinger in St. Lawrence County Court, at which time LaShawna pleaded not guilty, saying she believes the case against her is based almost entirely on the word of one witness who was not named, although she was clearly referring to her surviving daughter. LaShawna's defense attorney, Melissa Swartz, said she may need to speak with RC, for whom an order of protection was issued in court the same day. It's also the individual that I believe is necessary, although I have not seen the grand jury minutes, to prove the people's case in its entirety. I wholeheartedly hope someone is guarding this girl with their lives, wherever she is. Also during the arraignment hearing, the defense revealed that it will offer psychiatric evidence. Mr. Pasqua responded by saying the prosecution wants to obtain its own psychiatric evaluation of LaShawna. We have the right to have the defendant examined by our own expert as part of that. Mr. Pasqua also said at the hearing the prosecution is prepared to proceed to trial. Ms. Swartz successfully argued for LaShawna to remain free on the $50,000 bond she posted when she was released from jail last summer, saying, I don't think there have been any significant changes in the case that would warrant increasing that bail at this time. Judge Coffinger agreed, allowing LaShawna to walk free but requiring she return for pretrial litigation on November 8th, on which date Ms. Swartz requested an extension to file her omnibus motion due to the voluminous discovery material she has received in LaShawna's case. The judge granted the extension, giving Ms. Swartz until January 14th to file the motion. The judge also ordered a psychiatric evaluation of LaShawna to be conducted sometime in early 2022. For various reasons, the judge said, to set a trial date would be a fool's errand right now, and we will deal with that in the new year. LaShawna's next court date is a pretrial conference scheduled in February. My sources for this episode were Indiana's My Case portal, court documents, Indiana Public Media, the Herald Times, the Sunbury Daily Item, Penn Live Patriot News, Pennsylvania's Unified Judicial System web portal, WKOK News Radio, the Williamsport Sun Gazette, NorthCentralPA.com, North Country Now News, NNY 360, North Country Public Radio, the Governor Tribune Press, and WWNY 7 News. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another episode. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.